actually to counter the kind of campaign China has
Rahul
launched.
Srivastava, I want to introduce the guests joining us on this broadcast, starting with General J.J. Singh, former Chief of the Indian Army Staff, has been Governor as well. Joining us representing the Congress Party is Supriya Shrinate, and representing the Shiv Sena is Rajya Sabha MP Priyanka Chaturvedi. So let me go across to Priyanka Chaturvedi first. If you can lay out from the Shiv Sena's perspective the agenda that Uddhav Thackeray, your Chief Minister in Maharashtra, carries to this all-party meeting. What are the kind of questions the Shiv Sena has, and what are the kind of answers you're hoping the government will provide? Priyanka.
From day one, Rahul, our concern was always been that the government has to be transparent about what's transpiring at our borders and what is the status. We weren't asking for the strategies to be shared or what is happening on ground, but at least to give us an idea, because we live in a democracy. In a democracy, you might enjoy immense support of the people of this country, and you're voted to ensure that you hold on to the responsibility and fulfill it. But at the same time, you are also answerable to the opposition because they are also elected representatives. So giving a true picture, what unfortunately has happened is between the to and fro of whether they have, there have been incursions or no, there have been, the line of actual control was crossed over by Chinese troops or no. It was something which was a grey matter not to be discussed at all. So all we want is a clarity, and I think people of the nation deserve that clarity, more so after the unfortunate incident which took away the lives of our 20 soldiers. So this is something which Shiv Sena has been very clear about, that there can be no compromise on India's security. We stand by the government. However, the government also needs to be very clear about what it plans to do on its way forward and how we plan to avenge this entire death at the line of actual control.
Okay, so you're asking for revenge publicly to announce that against a country like China. That's something the government will have to look at, even though the Prime Minister has indicated that there will be retaliation for that brutal assault. Supriya Shrinate, can you lay out the Congress's perspective on the agenda that Sonia Gandhi carries on behalf of the Congress Party to this all-party meeting, Supriya?
I just want to put on record, Rahul, that before anything else, even if this meeting weren't to be called, I think the nation stands as one against China, an enemy that has deceived us, an enemy that has been deceptive, it has been cruel, barbaric, has done a most dishonorable thing by massacring our 20 martyrs the way they did. So as far as that is concerned, even if this meeting weren't to be called, we solidly stand as one nation. We stand with the government, whatever action that they take. However, I would want to say that it has been 45 days since news first started trickling in of some intrusion, of tension building up on the Ladakh border, and we kept asking government some very valid questions. Questions that were either ignored, questions that were either laughed at, mocked at, but eventually we have seen what those questions have finally resulted into. I am glad a meeting has been called. We welcome the step taken by the Prime Minister to build a broader consensus, to get everybody on board. I wish this was done a little earlier. However, I would want to put on record one very important thing, that a government that fancies itself in communicating very well has really failed on that front. And I'm not saying this as a politician today. I think people in India, by and large, are very confused with what's going on. Even the way the news of the martyrs trickled in. It took us 12 hours to say 3, then it took us another 24 hours to give their names. Then it took us more time and source media reports to say not 3, actually 20. Then there was denial about whether they were armed or not armed. The debate on the 1996 agreement. A lot of this has been said. Then, of course, whether troops were missing in action. There was complete denial.
So Amit Malviya, several piercing questions there from the Congress. A government that is supposed to be good at communications is being accused of being non-transparent and for being in denial till the absolute point where it was impossible to remain in denial. How do you respond to what the Shiv Sena and the Congress are asking you? Mr. Malviya, welcome.
Thank you, Rahul. I think what's very important to understand is that responsible government should. But what we're seeing from the opposition is voyeurism of the kind that's not required at this moment. We have the Congress spokesperson here talking in a very different tone than what their leader Rahul Gandhi is doing perhaps on the social media. One thing is very clear, that India has ensured that its territorial integrity is not compromised at any cost. There is no occupation, as the Congress has been alleging. Now that that was proved wrong, they moved on and tried to shift the goalpost and said that why were these men sent unarmed? When they were schooled that they were not sent unarmed for without a reason, but because of these several agreements that have been signed from 1993 to 96 and then 2013, all under the UP or the Congress regime. They are now into the business of counting bodies. So clearly the opposition is not speaking in the language that most Indians, forget the government, most Indians are speaking. They are speaking in the same language as the Chinese are. And I say this with a lot of responsibility and on a very disconcerting note. I have put out today evidences pointing to the fact that the Gandhi family, since 2008, has been enjoying personal hospitality of the Chinese government. They did so during the Beijing Olympics. It was then seen during the Dolam crisis that the Gandhis chose to take their briefing from the Chinese envoy and not from the Indian NEA. We've seen several instances of the Congress party speaking in the same language as the Communist Party of China. Now, there might be a deal that the Gandhis have with the CPC, but why should it overshadow the interests of the country?
Okay, we've heard the political voices. Before I go back for another round, I want to go across to General J.J. Singh, because as a military man, and if you ask anybody in army headquarters or in Northern Command, they'll say the enemy is on the other side of the line of actual control. It's India versus China. It's not Modi versus China. It's not BJP versus China. What are you making of the kind of attacks that we're hearing from India's opposition parties right ahead of this all-party meeting? General Singh.
Rahul, I agree with a lot what you have said. Now to comment on what is happening in the nation, in a democratic nation, politically, I think we are falling into the trap of the Chinese. The Chinese and their mandarins in Beijing know very well how to handle a democracy and a noisy opposition, disturbed democracy where people raise issues, and this is what they want. They want this kind of a discussion. The free press as well as the media and the people at large are, with the social media also, today very disturbed. And this is what they want. They want to win the war without fighting. That let us put the nation like India, a democracy like India, like that they have been dealing with UK and America in the past, as also, I would say, in South China Sea, when they started making that island, when they took the first step, they should have been stopped there and then. I think what is wrong with us is we are allowing the Chinese to create this kind of discussion, this kind of debate when there is a massing of troops on the borders.
Let Supriya Srinath respond.
Leaders are trying to decide
to this very important intervention from the former army chief. He's led men into war. And he's saying that you're falling into a Chinese trap. Beijing wants this kind of a discussion. They want to fight. They want to win without fighting. They want to get Indians to fight with each other. So instead of focusing on what do we do to get the Chinese back home, we're spending a lot of time arguing amongst ourselves, and he thinks that this is the kind of noisy democratic debate that the Chinese relish. Respond. Supriya Srinath.
With all due respect to the decorated general, I have a lot of respect for armed forces and men in uniform. He's also dabbled in politics, so I am going to give a political answer to this. First things first, I don't think we are falling into the trap of the Chinese. When the government kept denying that Chinese had intruded, they fell into the trap of the Chinese, because the Chinese are exactly saying the same thing, that we have not intruded, and our government kept saying all along that they have not intruded. Put two and two together. If you had not intruded and if there was no escalation of tension, what was the de-escalation exercise where a violent face-off happened? However, I don't think it is befitting for me to take on the general. I will respond to some of the things that Amit Malviya has said on this show. And I think when you start speaking lies too often, you start believing them. You start living in the hubris of believing the lies that you're propagating. First things first, please use words carefully on national television. Voyeurism is a word that you cannot use for the Indian opposition, no matter how much you hate us. You cannot, at any cost in a democracy, call us like the Chinese. You cannot say the opposition is speaking as China. That is not the case. Mind your words. I take great offense, and I will not take that line down. However, as far as the unarmed versus the armed debate is concerned, your spokesperson came on television, talked about the 1996 agreement. Generals like Panag have gone on to say that that agreement is for peacetime. And when your soldiers are being killed, you cannot be unarmed. You cannot be in a conflict territory without arms. Then the foreign minister says actually they were armed.
So let me put that question to General JJ Singh. One second. Let me put that question because one second, ma'am. Ma'am, 1 second. You know, the thing about you having been an anchor in the past is you take up a lot of airtime. I've given you 2 straight minutes to speak. You've asked an important question. I want General JJ Singh to respond.
No, I'm sorry. I was making a point. You cut me short.
You made the point, ma'am.
I was making a point. You cut me short.
Ma'am, you made a really long point. I have to allocate time, and I'm building on your question. I'm building on your question. I'm building on your question. General JJ Singh, we first heard Sambit Patra say that the border agreement stops the armed forces from carrying arms 2 kilometers this way, that way of the LAC. Then we heard Dr. Jaishankar, our External Affairs Minister, say that actually they had arms, but they were under instructions because of past border protocols not to use those weapons. People who are watching will have this doubt in their mind. If you're in this kind of an engagement with the Chinese army and things are getting as brutal and nasty as they were, we've heard from the likes of General Panag who've said the Indian army should have opened fire. That if you're being attacked in this murderous fashion, then no peacetime agreement holds. This is war. It's a tactical military situation. You've got the weapons, you defend yourself. Where do you stand on this issue of whether they would have been carrying weapons? Were they carrying weapons? Were those weapons loaded? Should those weapons have been used? General JJ Singh.
Yes, Rahul, first and foremost, we are dealing with China, and China does not tell anything straightforward, and we have to learn something from what the Chinese have learned in their civilization. They say we have intruded into their border, into their LAC. Have we intruded? Whose vehicles are masked up in the valley? Shall the people who are criticizing our government not ask questions that China came with the intention of crossing the LAC and trying to claim this territory? And the fact that we reacted so well that we were able to stop them. Now this incident which has happened is an one-off one because it happened when the CO wanted them to take away the tent or the observation post they had put there. It was simple as that. If the Chinese had believed in what their general had agreed with our general, then they were a disciplined army. I don't think they are a disciplined army. I don't think they obey orders because they must have been given these orders. The only order the Chinese army has obeyed till now in the last 40 years is not to open fire. That fire means a firearm. But that we have been respecting all other aspects of all these treaties. Please let our politicians understand it. I'm not going to accept any politician of our country to take brownie points and earn for vote bank. Sorry, don't play around with the military. The military says that they were carrying arms, but as per their procedures, they were told not to open fire. So they obey orders. There's a good army, a well-disciplined army. But when they used unethical methods, we taught them Chanakya Niti. We also marred them. We also thokoed them. We've caused casualties, and the world is saying there are 60 casualties. We have got 20, 21, but the rest are Chinese. So let's put it this way. Politicians should not play into this game of making the country divert from a united stand against the intrusion which the Chinese have done.
Okay,
they have
so
come
we've got over here on the one side a massive political outreach from the union government, and on the other side, and that's where I want to go across to Vijay Nambiar, who's been ambassador, on the diplomatic maneuvers that would be at play. What kind of outreach would be happening at this time from the Ministry of External Affairs? Dr. Jaishankar is a long-time China hand. How would Indian envoys be trying to communicate our message externally, or do you think we're not really at that stage and nothing really is being said to countries outside because we're saying we'll deal with China ourselves?
I think well, thank you for inviting me. I think there is one thing which we need to say first in terms of what the implications of the present situation are. Then the second is what our reaction to it would be. In a sense, the first is one of analysis and the second is one of response. Now, you are suggesting almost one. I think the Ministry of External Affairs would have to make clear to all our missions what the implications of the threshold moment of this week has been. And that is, what is the credibility of the arrangements that we have had with China which are at stake now, right from Wuhan Spirit and the agreements, the SOPs, the credibility of what China's actions have now, in a sense, a body blow has been given to all that. And then after that, you get a response. And I think our response cannot afford to be short-sighted or irresponsible. So we have to, in sending the message across, show both sense of responsibility and
so when you talk about response, and this is where viewers would like to know your views, are you thinking in terms of a military response, or do you believe a diplomatic, economic response is all part of India's response?
I think the military response is, in a sense, both sides. On the political side, the government has said that we are not going to escalate the situation, but we will remain firm. And I think the main point is that there is a price to be paid for the action that has been taken. I think those points have been made, and I think that is an element, is a political determination which will have to be conveyed through our ambassadors all across. I think the second thing is that we are not going to take any irresponsible, any kind of impulsive action. At the same time, we should be showing that there is a unity of purpose inside the country domestically. And this, I think, in a sense, reaches out to some of the points already being made. And that is, on the one hand, there has to be a reaching out to all the opinions in the country, because we have to be proud, and we will be proud. We are always proud of our democratic system, and therefore reaching out, and at the same time,
do you want to, Priyanka Chaturvedi, respond to General J.J. Singh when he says that, this is exactly what the Chinese want, for the opposition to turn the skewers on the government, for the government to be in a political frying pan, to have to constantly look behind, see what Rahul Gandhi is saying, see what Uddhav Thackeray is saying, instead of looking at the enemy and saying, what should we do with the Chinese army? Shouldn't that really be our collective focus at this moment, Priyanka?
Absolutely. I don't agree with you bringing in the Chief Minister of Maharashtra into this conversation, because I upfront told you that we stand by the government and the decision they will take. Because it is a known fact in a democracy, you love your country, but you do question your government, and that is why you have elected opposition as well. All we are saying is transparency. You must understand, in the past 2 months of the flip-flops of a government not sharing any information or not even taking people into confidence, people who are elected representatives who are answerable to their constituencies as well, not taking them into confidence, has left them with an egg on their face after they found this entire brutal attack happening on our people. And we need to understand that what is our next way forward. We are absolutely okay if it takes a delayed response, a well-thought-out response, a response which is not a knee-jerk reaction to what has happened. There has to be a response. How that response comes about is something the government needs to consult with all opposition parties as well as their own alliance partners, and come across a response which is befitting response to how China dealt with our people. So this is all that Shiv Sena has been saying.
That's an important point that you make, because Amit Malviya, the moment the government starts insisting that the Chinese are not in our territory, let me just refer to the Pangong area, and if our producers can pull out the maps, the Indian claim line goes all the way up till Finger 8. The Chinese have amassed, and we've got satellite imagery showing, in the beach area of Finger 4, on the ridges of Finger 4, there is a massive Chinese deployment. The moment you start saying publicly, but the Chinese are not on our land, the Chinese are not in your land, that's exactly what the Chinese want, because they've come in from Finger 8 to Finger 4, where they earlier had no permanent deployment. They're sitting on a head, and here, instead of figuring out what we'll do to throw them out, the government has gone into a zone where it's saying, actually, the Chinese are not in our territory. Amit Malviya, respond to that.
You know better than anyone else that we are right now talking about the Galwan Valley, which is where this confrontation has happened. The Pyeongtangsho Lake region and
Galwan Valley, what you're saying is correct. But the Pangong area is also in India, and that's one of the sites of confrontation, and it is undisputed through very visual satellite imagery that the Chinese are on Indian land.
Rahul, I know the topography of the region fairly well, and I've seen the maps that you put out on your channel, and that's why I'm making this distinction very clear. There is no ambiguity on where the LAC is as far as the Galwan region is concerned. As far as the Pyeongtangsho Lake region is concerned, it has always been a disputed area, and this dispute is not something which is as recent as 2014 or even 2020. It has been going on for decades. So let's not conflate the two, because the last thing we want is to confuse your viewers with the two different regions and where the conflict has happened. That's point number one. Point number two is that we forget that the Indian Army has done an exemplary job of handling the aggression from the Chinese. If we have lost men, we've inflicted damage. Now, that may seem like a tit for tat or a retributive statement, but the fact is that countries maintain armies to protect their territories, and which is exactly what the Indian Army has done. Instead of being proud of it, we are sort of going round and round because it's given the opposition, supposedly, some ammunition against the government. But I see a lot of people don't think like how the opposition leaders do. And that is where the importance of this debate lies. We have seen a lot of people who have tried to build narratives which have been like shifting sands. And every time they have been found wanting, they have tried to move on to another goalpost, which is exactly what the opposition is doing. I have a very simple question. There is a question of territorial integrity. Have the Chinese been able to encroach on our land in Galwan Valley? The answer is no. Why did this confrontation happen? This happened because the Chinese moved 56 kilometers ahead from their previous post within their side of the LAC, and the Indian government has demanded that they go back to the original position. Why do the Chinese want to come up front? Is because the Indian government is building infrastructure at a pace that is unseen before. We have had a situation where in 2013, you had A.K. Antony come out on the floor of the House and admit that not building infrastructure in borders was the policy of the Congress government.
Now, this is a point that Supriya Srinath, you need to respond to, because the reality is, and General J.J. Singh will bear us out on this, and I want to explain this to our viewers. For a long time after 1962, the general belief in Indian governments was that let's not develop infrastructure close to the line of actual control, because if the Chinese were to come in, Indian roads would speed up their ingress, and therefore if there's no infrastructure, the Chinese would find it difficult to move in. That was a very, very defensive mentality. From there on, from about 2010 onwards, we've shifted gears to a far more aggressive border development scenario, where we're now, through the BRO, actually developing border roads, and that process has speed up even more just over the last 6 years. And therefore, Supriya Srinath, when you take the kind of pot shots you do, and the reality is the Chinese are objecting to the development of that Darbuk, Shyok, Daulat Beg Oldie road, which India has built, and we've got maps, we can show you what's happening. If your governments in the past had been aggressive about border infrastructure development, a lot of this problem wouldn't have happened, Supriya Srinath.
I take offense to the words that you're using. Pot shots is not something that the Indian opposition is doing at the government, not at such a sensitive time. We are seeking answers. And in a democracy, nobody can deny us that right. Whether you like it or not, we will ask questions, and those questions must be answered. In a democracy, we are not taking pot shots. The problem with twisted truths like the ones Amit Malviya is quoting is that you start believing in them. And his problem is that he has started believing in some of them. Yes, there was a certain policy that we had towards our neighbors, that we had as far as our borders were concerned, but these are successive governments that have adhered to, and maybe, Atalji's government was one of them also. It is not as if because in the last 6 years infrastructure is being developed and so things have changed. I want to go back to the previous argument that was being made. The confusion about were they armed, were they not armed. Do our decorated generals, do our men of uniform who have questioned this, who have red flagged this, who have raised concerns, are they also treacherous? Or are they also taking pot shots? Are they also humiliating the government, or are they raising genuine concerns? And these concerns are not just coming in from the Indian opposition. Because do you want us to believe that an entire battalion was just disciplined and stood there, whereas its commanding officer was being bludgeoned? I fail to understand that. This is downright, disrespecting our men in arms. This is not right. Our forces. There's a video floating today of Balwant Singh in Punjab, and his son has called him up and said that they were outnumbered, they were without weapons. He is lying with 14 stitches in a lay hospital. I mean, who's answerable for all this?
Okay.
We cannot concoct the truth here.
General
the truth
J.J.
has only
Singh,
one way. It gets out.
You didn't respond the first time Supriya raised this question, so I'll ask it again. In your view, should the Indian soldiers who External Affairs Minister Jaishankar says has weapons, even though we haven't heard from the army on this, should they have opened fire disregarding any past border protocol when they came under murderous assault from the Chinese army?
Rahul, first and foremost, I want to say that the arms, if they were with them, would be used when their CEO is being killed. But they did not use them because that is the protocol they are following. But they did hammer them. So what are we trying to aim at? Are we trying to aim at that our people stood at attention and allowed the Chinese to do what they want to do? The Chinese will think 10 times before they do something like this again. They came premeditated with those rods and everything you have seen. Now please, I'm telling you that in 1962 also, till the very end, they kept telling us we will solve it by dialogue. And what really was happening, they were preparing for a full-fledged border war. We cannot believe. Now there's an agreement being done by the generals on the ground. Our soldiers don't get told that, listen, you will be attacked in this way. Now please don't sit here in an air-conditioned room and think you know everything. At night, in those treacherous mountain ravines, many have died by just falling down the precipices. So therefore, please don't make it so simplistic that as if it was a drama being played. The soldiers don't see at night because each one of them is not wearing a night vision goggles. So therefore, they saw, some did not see. They did not know the entire scenario. Some people were killed only because they fell down into the precipices. So what I'm trying to tell you is that the Indian Army soldier will fire in self-defense. Always he will fire. If he is being told that you will not use arms, but in self-defense, he will definitely use his weapon. So here, as far as we are concerned, we know very well that in this case, whatever happened so swiftly, and there were patrols. What was happening? There were patrols which were going and seeing whether de-escalation is happening or not.
Okay, so you make an important point, and that's the question I want to ask Vijay Nambiar. Mr. Nambiar, do you think on the back of what happened in the Galwan Valley, all those agreements are now dust? Anything which tells the Indian Army you will not fire, because it wasn't imagined at that time that there would be this kind of a murderous assault. Going forward, if the Chinese raise their hand, the Indian Army will take them down with every single weapon that we have.
I agree with my friend General J.J. Singh, who's, we work together. Now, I think the SOPs, I think that the Indian Army has performed creditably despite the fact that their hands were tied behind their backs in terms of the non-use of weapons, but not weapons, of guns, of firing. But the fact is, they made the best of the situation and they did actually respond appropriately. Of course, in the process, they had to pay a very heavy price. And that is true. And now what has happened is that the agreements, the confidence building measures, the SOPs, and the other agreements, right from 93 all the way to 2013, are now, in a sense, they will need to be looked at very seriously. And I don't think that you can say that they stand intact. And clearly, the message will go to the Chinese that these will have either to be drastically renegotiated, or that the next time such a thing happens, all bets are off. I think the point will clearly have been made, because I think the External Affairs Minister has clearly said that he sensed, it was our clear assessment that this was a premeditated.
So my sense is all bets are already off. If, God forbid, something like this were to happen again, there will be an immediate Indian response, and it won't be of the kind that we saw last time. I want to go across to Rahul Srivastav. He's got more details about the briefing that's going on in that all-party meeting. Rahul, we've heard the different perspectives these parties will carry. You're hearing from that meeting itself. What are you finding out? The External Affairs Minister has spoken, the Defence Minister has spoken. Any idea at all of what they've said?
So Rahul, we have come to know what the Defence Minister said. He has briefed the meeting about what transpired. In whatever details the defense minister at a platform like this could have shared. We are told that he has briefed the leaders that what kind of state of preparedness, what kind of mobilization, without giving out the exact details, the government and the defense ministry has carried out to protect the integral territories, the territories of India. What we are hearing that Mr. Jaishankar has also briefed the meeting, in which he has explained a large gamut of things, though very few details we have received yet. What we are told that Mamata Banerjee, one of the points of our curiosity was that what will leaders like Mamata Banerjee say, because the kind of attacks she has been facing over the last few days, and the kind of rivalry between the government, central government and the state government, Mamata Banerjee is going to very categorically back the defense forces. She is going to say that for 22 years of TMC's political life, the party has always backed the government on diplomacy and strategic issues. But what it wants the government to do, be transparent as far as the information is concerned, and keep the information flow constant, not hide from the political parties. It can't be that today you are coming for consensus and tomorrow you leave the political parties alone in it. But she is eventually going to endorse the government stand and the strategic as well as diplomatic. What we are also told.
So we've had a very important conversation where we've understood the perspective that the government brings to this meeting, some senses of what the opposition will say, and we've heard from a diplomat and a top general about the diplomatic and the military aspects of this democratic debate. But remember, the difference between India and China is that here we can ask questions, and the government does take the opposition into account and response to them, which is much more than communist China can claim. And therefore, it's an important part of the democratic process. The Prime Minister has already signaled there will be a military response to this provocation. All of India is waiting and watching, and we in India Today are covering the story very closely. We're slipping into a break. We'll have a lot more for you when we come back on the other side. Stay with us.